What happens when Barron Trump discovers his beloved former nanny is homeless and struggling to survive? What he does next will not only change her life forever but inspire the world in ways no one could have imagined. Barron Trump leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes scanning the contents of the desk drawer one last time. Moving out of the family home in New York to attend college was bittersweet. For years, this desk had held his secrets, his treasures, and his dreams. Yet now, as he sifted through its contents, he stumbled upon something he hadn't seen in years. It was an envelope, yellowed slightly with age, tucked beneath a stack of childhood drawings. His name, written in delicate cursive, stared back at him. Barron. The handwriting was unmistakable. Clara. His nanny, his confidant, and at one point the closest person to him outside of his family. He hadn't seen or heard from her in years. Her departure had been sudden, and though his parents had assured him it was for personal reasons, they never gave him a full explanation. As a child, he had accepted it reluctantly, but now, as a young man, the memory lingered like a wound that hadn't quite healed. Sliding his finger under the flap, Barron opened the envelope with care. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, her familiar scent faintly lingering. "My dear Barron," it began, "by the time you read this, I may no longer be a part of your life. Please know that leaving was the hardest decision I've ever made. But sometimes love means stepping away for the greater good. You are so special, Barron, and I believe you will grow into a man who touches the lives of many. Never forget that you are loved, not just by your family, but by me as well. Always, Clara." He read the letter twice, then a third time, his heart heavy with questions. Why had she left? And why hadn't she said goodbye in person? Barron folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. Something about the timing of this discovery felt deliberate, as if the universe was nudging him toward action. Clara had been more than a nanny. She had been a guiding presence during some of the most formative years of his life. He had to find her. Barron's earliest memories of Clara were filled with warmth and laughter. She had been there when he took his first steps, when he struggled with his first words, and when he insisted on building pillow forts in the middle of the night. Clara wasn't just a caretaker, she was a storyteller, an artist, and a dreamer. She painted vivid pictures of faraway lands with her words, making every bedtime story feel like an adventure. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Barron?" she'd ask, her voice soft but encouraging. "A pilot," he'd say one week. "A detective." The next. Clara would always nod, her smile never faltering. "You can be anything you want to be," she'd reply. "Just promise me you'll use your heart as much as your mind." When his parents were busy with their demanding schedules, it was Clara who attended his school plays, cheered him on at soccer games, and baked cookies with him on rainy afternoons. She had a way of making him feel like the most important person in the world. Then, one day, she was gone. Determined to find Clara, Barron began his search the only way he knew how. Discreetly. He reached out to one of his family's trusted investigators, a man named Arthur, who had worked quietly behind the scenes for years. "I need your help," Barron said, sliding Clara's letter across the table. Arthur studied the letter carefully. "Do you have any idea where she might have gone? Family? Friends?" Barron shook his head. "She never talked much about herself. She always focused on me, but I know she used to send money back to her family overseas." "Do you know where overseas?" "Somewhere in South America, I think," Barron replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "That's all I've got." Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "It's not much to go on, but I'll see what I can do." Days turned into weeks, and Barron's anticipation grew with each passing moment. When Arthur finally called him with an update, Barron's heart raced. "I found her," Arthur said. "But you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you." Barron gripped the phone tightly. Arthur's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. "What do you mean?" Barron asked, his voice low, trying to mask the unease creeping into his chest. Arthur sighed on the other end of the line. "Clara. She's alive, but she's not in a good place, son. She's been living on the streets in Washington, D.C. for the past 2 years." Barron's breath caught. Homeless? He couldn't reconcile the image of the vibrant, nurturing woman who had practically raised him with the thought of her struggling to survive. How did this happen? I don't have all the details yet, but it seems like a series of setbacks, health issues, financial troubles. I'm still digging. Barron's mind raced, his thoughts a tangle of guilt and disbelief. How had someone so kind and selfless ended up in such a dire situation? And why hadn't he known sooner? Where exactly is she? Barron demanded. Arthur hesitated. She's been seen at a shelter near Union Station. But listen, Barron, approaching her might be tricky. People in her situation, they don't always want to be found. I don't care, Barron said firmly. I'm going to her, tonight. That evening, Barron arrived in Washington, D.C. under the cover of anonymity. He dressed down, jeans, a plain hoodie, and a baseball cap, to avoid drawing attention. As he approached the shelter, the air felt colder than it had any right to be, the biting chill gnawing at his resolve. The shelter was a modest brick building with a weathered sign that read, Hope Haven. People lingered outside, bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, their faces etched with stories of struggle. Barron scanned the crowd, his heart pounding. Would she even recognize him after all these years? Looking for someone? A voice broke through his thoughts. Barron turned to see a woman with kind but weary eyes, her clipboard held close. She was one of the shelter's volunteers. Yes, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Her name is Clara. Clara Mendoza. The woman's expression softened. Clara, she's here, but she's very private. Doesn't talk much to anyone. Please, Barron urged, his tone almost pleading. I need to see her. It's important. After a moment's hesitation, the woman nodded. Wait here. Barron stood near the entrance, his breath visible in the icy air. Minutes felt like hours until the woman returned, a frail figure trailing behind her. His heart nearly stopped. Clara looked nothing like the vibrant woman he remembered. Her once bright eyes were tired, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tucked under a worn knit hat. But despite the changes, there was no mistaking her. Clara, Barron said softly, stepping forward. She froze, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, it seemed as if she didn't recognize him. Then her lips parted, and a single word escaped. Barron? Clara stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. It's really you, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's me, Barron said, his throat tight. He wanted to pull her into a hug, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But something in her demeanor stopped him. What are you doing here? Clara asked, her tone a mixture of disbelief and shame. She glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear. I came to find you, Barron said. I found your letter. He reached into his pocket and held it up. Clara's eyes dropped to the envelope and she took an unsteady step back. You shouldn't have come, she murmured. Why not? Barron asked, his voice rising with emotion. Clara, you disappeared. I've spent years wondering what happened to you, and now I find out you're living like this? You don't have to? I don't want your pity, Clara interrupted, her voice sharp but breaking. I'm fine. I've survived this long. You don't owe me anything, Barron. Barron shook his head. This isn't about owing you. This is about family. You were there for me when I needed you most. Now it's my turn. Clara's composure cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. You don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I left because I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you to know. Know what? Barron pressed, stepping closer. Clara hesitated, her hands trembling. Finally, she took a shaky breath and said, I was diagnosed with cancer shortly after I left the Trump household. I didn't want anyone to know, not your parents, not you. I thought I could handle it on my own, but the treatments drained me. I lost everything, my savings, my home, my dignity. Barron felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. Clara, he began, but the words failed him. I didn't want you to see me like this, she continued, her voice breaking. You deserve to remember me the way I was. But I see you now, Barron said, his voice firm. And you're still Clara. You're still the woman who raised me, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And I'm not going to walk away. Over the next few days, Barron worked quietly behind the scenes to secure a place for Clara to stay. He arranged for her to receive medical care, enlisting the help of trusted professionals to ensure she had access to the best treatment available. At first, Clara resisted his help, her pride and shame keeping her guarded. But Barron's persistence and his genuine love for her slowly wore down her defenses. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one evening, as they sat in the warmth of her new apartment, a modest but cozy space he had furnished for her. "Because you did the same for me," Barron said simply, "and because I care about you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. Word of Barron's act of kindness spread when a shelter volunteer shared it with a local journalist. Despite his efforts to remain discreet, headlines exploded. Barron Trump reunites with homeless nanny, changes her life forever. Initially, Clara was reluctant to face the spotlight. "I don't want pity," she told Barron. "This isn't about pity," Barron reassured her. "It's about inspiring others to care." The story resonated worldwide, sparking donations to shelters and advocacy for caretakers in need. Inspired by Clara's resilience, Barron launched a nonprofit called Clara's Heart, dedicated to helping struggling nannies and caretakers. Clara became an advisor, using her story to mentor others. Months later, Clara stood beside Barron at the charity's first gala. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her health much improved. As she stepped onto the stage to speak, her voice trembled but carried strength. "I once thought my life had ended," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But kindness brought me back. It reminded me that no one is beyond saving. Barron, you gave me more than a home. You gave me hope." The crowd rose in applause, but Clara only looked at Barron, her miracle son, who smiled back with quiet pride. Clara went on to live a life of purpose, mentoring countless individuals. Barron's nonprofit became a global success, helping thousands of caretakers find stability. Their bond remained unshakable, proof that love and kindness can bridge even the widest gaps. And for Clara, her story became a reminder that even when life knocks you down, the right hand extended in love can lift you higher than you ever thought possible. Love stories that tug at your heartstrings and leave you inspired? Subscribe to Talecraft, where every tale is crafted to captivate your soul and ignite your imagination. Hit that subscribe button now and let's embark on this journey together.